You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, mindset. Having the right frame of mind, I think, is the launch pad for everything you may want to do as a leader, a professional, just a good neighbor. You got to have the right mindset to get into it. My guest today is a gentleman who spends his time helping people understand that, and he's coming at it from an interesting angle, but I'll let him elaborate. His name is Chad Hufford. Chad, welcome to the show.
Doug, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to encourage your audience.
Now, I alluded to Chad coming in from a little bit different angle. I guess his day job, you might say, is wealth management, helping people with investment strategies and things of that sort. And we have never represented ourselves as a show that focuses in that area, but because I'll leave that to the other folks. But Chad brings a different spin that I really did gravitate toward and appreciate. It is about this thing called mindset. So, Chad, tell the folks a little bit about what we were talking about in the green room before we got online here.
Well, you mentioned the importance of mindset, and it isn't an important aspect of having a secure financial future. It is the important aspect. And when we are screening for our clients, we screen for temperament more than anything else, more than wealth level, more than education level. It's temperament. And the quick analogy that I'll give you is my industry is always trying to find a better investment, a faster, more robust, more exciting investment for somebody. And it'd be like going to a gym and you've been a member for 6 months, you don't go. It's really become an expensive keychain, your little membership card. And you go and you complain to the manager and they're like, okay, well, we're going to get some faster treadmills in here. And that's going to help you get in better shape. Well, the treadmills were never the problem. The problem was you weren't on them. And my industry is trying to come up with better treadmills instead of actually teaching people and training people how to utilize them effectively. And most importantly, keeping them on the treadmill when everything hurts. And that's one of the most difficult things when there's uncertainty in the economy, when there's, hey, maybe a crazy election cycle coming up. How do you keep people engaged doing the difficult things that they need to do to accomplish the task that they said were important to them? And it's not just having good materials, good tools, and a great plan. It's about executing that plan relentlessly with passion and conviction, and that requires mindset. We can't just know the right thing, we have to do the right thing.
Yeah, so very important. We were also chatting before we got on air here about the kind of the seminal high water mark or low water mark, however you want to look at it, back in 2008 when the big financial crash happened. And for those that are listening that were on that roller coaster back then, I had a very good friend who summed it all up for me. We were at a social event sometime after the fact, and he was sharing that his wife kind of panicked when everybody else was panicking. And she said, we got to cash out. We got to cash out. And he said, no, dear. He said, the only thing we're going to accomplish if we cash out is that we are going to lock in on our losses. Because the market had already declined and the holdings were already down, 30, 40%. He said, we're not going to do that. We're in this for the long game. We don't need the cash right now. We're going to hold and we're going to trust that it's going to rebound. And sure enough, it not only rebound, but if you had some of your original holdings from that time frame, I believe the numbers are pretty astronomical of what's happened since then.
Yeah, if you just look at the S&P 500, Doug, if somebody had put $1 million in the S&P 500, you can't directly invest in that index, but just hypothetically, if you could put $1 million in the S&P 500 index on October 9th, 2007, which was the peak of the market before it went on a 57% decline, that $1 million would have looked suspiciously like 400,000 by March of 2009. Yet, if somebody had held on to that money, it'd be worth about $5 million today. Now, They would have looked like and felt like an idiot 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. It did not turn around quickly. It was a scary time for quite a long period. And there was a ton of uncertainty coming out of it. And our economic numbers, our employment numbers looked horrible for a long time. But the only people that lost money were the people that sold. And it's again, it's that lack of commitment, and it's a lack of stick-to-itiveness, of grit and determination. Sometimes it's just a lack of accountability and encouragement. But the only way that those people lost money is they took a temporary decline and they turned it into a permanent loss. And I'm not picking on anybody that did that. Millions and millions of tens of millions of Americans did that. But it is a mindset thing. And I want to encourage people that it's okay to feel the fear. We tell people, we got people, these business gurus, Doug, talking about no fear and go out there and just crush your industry and da 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 da. No, there's no such thing as courage without fear. You can't be brave unless you're feeling fear and hesitancy, but it's not allowing those emotions to control us. We can recognize those emotions. We should be aware of those emotions. We just can't let those emotions dictate. So it's being able to step forward in the face of fear and continue to execute the right thing, regardless of what your feelings are telling you.
Yeah. As the great Jimmy Buffett said in one of his songs, don't create a permanent reminder of a temporary feeling.
I like that. I've not heard that, but I like it.
Yeah. Well, the song's a great one. He's got about three different snippets of the scenario there that you ought to listen to. It's a great ballad. But yeah, if we come forward in time, we had obviously the big crash of '08, and then things did rebound and recover, and then boom comes 2020 and the infamous pandemic of COVID and all of the uncertainty and volatility that happened there. From your seat, probably somewhat on the front row, what did you observe people doing there during that time?
Well, we tell people that equity declines, stock market declines are sometimes a lot like a Mission Impossible movie. There's enough nuances and differences that we watch this movie and we say, this has never happened before. The villain's a little bit different, the plot's a little bit different, but they come out with a new movie every 3 or 4 years. And that's kind of how major market declines go. The problem is we've never seen that particular movie before. So we say, oh, this time it's different. And again, there are nuances. And with COVID, of course, there's a lot of nuances we've never seen before. And there's a lot of people fearing that this was the end of economic life as we know it. And again, I think everybody was fearful. I mean, what was different about COVID is during some economic collapses, as long as you still had your job, yeah, I mean, there might be things that you notice and things like that, but your day-to-day life is still relatively the same. You might have to pinch pennies in a few areas, maybe your sales numbers are down, whatever. But in COVID, you could not get away from the fact that the world had changed almost overnight. People wearing masks, things shut down. I mean, you couldn't gather together. They were telling people like, you shouldn't eat together in groups of like six or more. Well, we've got six kids. There's eight of us. So, we happen to kick kids and make them eat outside. No, I'm kidding. We didn't do that, but it's actually a good idea. It keeps the kitchen cleaner. Anyway, but like it infiltrated every area of our life. And I think that just turned up the screws on the fear because you almost could not ignore it. So sometimes in the midst of economic uncertainty, you turn off the TV, you turn off the news. 20 years ago, that's all you had to do. Well, now it's on our iPhones. We're getting emails. It's everywhere. It's on podcasts. You can't get away from it. And in 2020, it wasn't just in the media. It was going to the grocery store. It was taking a drive, people wearing masks in the car. Like you could not get away from it. And that it ramped up the emotions so much more. And you and I talked a little bit online or offline, I'm sorry, about connections in the oil field and things like that. And I mean, you remember where oil was trading negative, like a barrel of oil was negative. And we were asking people, where do I sign up for my free oil? Like I will put a tank in my lawn if I have to, give me my free oil or pay me to take it. But there was crazy things that were happening because we work with so many people in the oil field. Like it was even more exaggerated for them. But ultimately, there was a path forward. But again, just like that Mission Impossible movie, there's periods where you cannot see a resolution. It is dark, it is scary, and there's no hope, there's no solution in sight. But it's being able to stay on the path, even if you don't know how that path is going to resolve, and continue to do the right things. And that's what's it's so hard to do. And 2020 was a phenomenal example. I think other than 2008, 2009, that was the most fear I've ever seen was in 2020. Um, a lot of ambiguity, and I think that's what separates people who are successful in a lot of ways. And it doesn't matter; could be in business, it could be in finance, could be in coaching, could be in sports. But people who have a tolerance for ambiguity, who can face the unknown and feel some fear, but stick to a plan.
Right. Well, it is all about, I think the fear is a given, and the question is how do you deal with it? You know, what relationship do you have with fear? Is it going to become a debilitating shutdown factor, or are you going to find a way forward? And we've talked about it a lot on this show because I run into it in my executive coaching practice. A lot of leaders were dealing with the great unknowns during COVID. They had no good answers. You know, go home, come back, stay home, come back. You know, wrestling with the whole remote work dynamic. But I think at the root of all of that, what was really driving most people's mindset was the idea that we don't know what this is, and our very individual mortality was being challenged. We didn't know what COVID really was. We were hearing things about how traumatic and disastrous it was for many, many, and definitely a tragedy, not to minimize those that did, die from it, but it proved not to be a worldwide global pandemic that wiped out the entire population of the world. And coming out of that, people realized, hey, I need to reset some values. I need to reset some ideas. And, it is a big reset point.
It was, and I think what you said is really important. Like it turned out not to be as bad as a lot of people thought, and not to diminish the lives that were lost. And I had a friend that was 44 years old that passed away. Big, big, strong guy, 6'5", like 300 pounds, looked like a linebacker, and and he lost his life. And so there was a lot of tragedy, but it was the unknown that it caused so much disruption. People deal with bad news much better than they deal with uncertain news, much better than they deal with ambiguity. And here's how much people wanted a semblance of control or stability. We heard that this was a this virus, and we don't know how destructive it was going to be, but it was going to possibly affect your breathing and airways and all that. And what did people do? We went out and bought 3 years worth of toilet paper. That makes no sense. Like, if we're worried about losing we might not have food, we might not have we don't have this. Like, if you don't have food, the toilet paper thing, that kind of like, you don't have food, you don't need to do the other thing. So why do you need toilet paper? But people wanted some feeling of control. So, man, we might not be able to breathe. Like, the economy might be shutting down. We might lose our jobs. But gosh darn it, we're gonna be able to wipe our butts for the next 3 years. But that was a response, the uncertainty, where human beings are so desperate to have some sort of security or semblance of control that we'll go off and do something completely ridiculous just to feel like we haven't lost our agency completely. And in finance, we see it all the time where people cash out their 401k and they turn a temporary decline and they turn to permanent loss. They sell off the best companies in the world at a discount in the middle of a recession, but they feel like, okay, I can act on this thing. I'm not just sitting here experiencing all this uncertainty. I'm going to do something. But too often, when our actions are fueled primarily by emotions, those actions, those reactions are usually more focused on the short term and can harm us in the long run. They end up stealing from the future versions of ourselves.
Totally. And that is so very true. I'm involved in a transaction. I'm advising a buyer of a business and the seller. It's a home construction business, and the seller is an older gentleman. He's in his 70s. He's ready to cash out and move on. He's the business is good, but he has kind of lost his motivation to continue to push to grow it. He's just ready to exit. And one of the things he was talking about in terms of going back to the pandemic and some of the historic numbers of his business and what's been happening, in the home building industry, supply chain blew up and cost of goods skyrocketed. It was a
Hmm.
classic supply and demand conundrum. Supply was near zero, demand was higher than it had been. And what does that do to price? It drives it up through the roof. The scarce good goes to the highest paying customer. And home builders suffered that. But he said, interestingly, from his view and the long time that he's been in this industry, he said prices are back to very normal right now. Availability is back to normal. That bubble burst finally, and his margins are back where they need to be, and everything looks really good. But he admitted that he had the temptation to just shut it all down when all the squeeze was happening, but he knew and realized that if he did that, all that he would do was secure his losses and
Hmm.
not position himself for the long run. And just very similar to the oil and gas we're talking about, certainly real estate and home building has its own booms and busts. And for someone who's been in the game a long time, they know what they're doing. And in his case, he has niched into a certain style and type of building that is in high demand, and he's been able to sustain.
Well, I think you make a great point, Doug. Those temptations to give in, to capitulate, to just pack it all up, like we're just gonna wash our hands and walk away. Whether it's your business, whether it's your family, your marriage, um, or whether it's your investments, your financial strategy. I think it's normal to feel those temptations to just it's too hard, it's too difficult. I'm going to give up. Um, but we just can't give into that. We can feel the feelings. We just can't give into them. And that's so common in finances where we're swimming against the grain. Like we live in a culture where we've normalized unhealthy things. Unhealthy relationships with money, unhealthy relationships with each other. We've normalized bad behavior. And when you are swimming upstream, going against the grain of society, because let me look at it. We are the richest, most profitable, most connected society ever, but yet we suffer the highest rates of depression. We are the most medicated. We're the most obese society that's ever existed. Those two shouldn't connect, but they do. Um, and it's because we've made unhealthy behavior in all walks and all areas of life normal, and it is exhausting when you're going against that. It's like running a marathon through a stream that's running the other direction, and it's the fatigue does set in. So I think it's so important as we talk about mindset for people to surround themselves with like-minded people that are going to give you the hard truths. They're going to tell you what you need to know, not necessarily what you want to hear, and push you to go forward and have that sounding board. Because a lot of leaders, and men are the worst, but leaders in general, men or women, it doesn't matter. We feel like we've got to put on a tough face and act like we've got all the answers. And back in COVID, sometimes we would just sit around with my team and they would ask, like, what are we doing about this thing or that thing? I just said, I don't know. Like, we'll come up with something and we're going to execute it, but I don't know. But we're going to figure this out together. And I think as leaders, it's okay to admit that you're frustrated, you're scared, you don't know. Because I think people can resonate with that. And it gives them permission to let down their guard when we're doing the same thing.
I totally agree with you and have seen that play out. And it is a shift in excuse me, conventional and traditional leadership thinking. Because to your point, the leader's supposed to have the confidence and certainty and drive to keep moving everything forward. But in reality, leaders at all levels are often faced with that ambiguity and uncertainty, and they don't know what's around the corner. They don't know what's next. So it does become a challenge to get comfortable with, number one, admitting you don't know, and that's a big leap for some, and then inviting and opening up the discussion with your team and your people to say, well, let's talk about this together. Let's figure this out. Let's see what we can do. I tell a classic story. I told it recently, again, going a little bit back to COVID. Here locally where I am, there was a young lady who owned a company that made custom bath soaps, very nichey, product, and many would call it a luxury type item. But was doing quite well. COVID came along, and the demand for that went to
Mm.
zero. Nobody was spending their money on anything like that. So in a very short period of time, her revenues dried up, and she huddled her team together and said, "I don't know what's next, but I know the company can't keep operating exactly as it is. I really don't want to lay anybody off, but I am going to ask, we're going to have to do something to reduce overhead. And I want to have a collective here and figure out what to do about it." And two big things came out of that meeting. Number one, she was wildly surprised that after a couple of days, the team came back to her and said, "You know what? We've had our own chats. We've all agreed to voluntarily take a pay cut.
Mm.
And here's what we've agreed to do. And we're asking, it does be temporary, but we're willing to do it for some period of time. Will that be enough to keep us all afloat?" And she was like almost, you know, to tears thinking about it. But she said, "Yes, that's great." And they said, "And we've got an idea. We have all the makings for hand sanitizer. That's a hot commodity now. We just need to learn how to make it in mass, because
Mm.
it's not a little bitty bar of soap. It needs to be in a giant pump bottle."
Right.
So they got busy, and sure enough, and then the next thing they ran into was unavailability, I'll get the word out, of containers. So they got creative. They went to the Igloo Corporation, those giant
Hmm.
25-gallon water jugs you see on the sidelines at sports events. They started buying those. Of course, they labeled them very carefully. This is not to be consumed. It's hand sanitizer. They started selling it in bulk, and one of the giant grocery chains here in the local area basically said, "We'll buy everything you can make."
Wow.
And so, total turnaround for her company, but it was that creativity and mindset to say, "I'm not giving it up. I want to overcome."
Well, what a great picture of empowerment and respect for her to, again, tell her employees not what they wanted to hear, but what they needed to know. Things are tight. There's going to be some changes need to be made to show them the respect that I'm entrusting you with some difficult information that some companies might hide from their employees, and they might feel it'd be easier in the moment to just go along like everything was great until you hit a point where you can't go anymore, and then you're doing emergency layoffs. But she laid it out, and she also empowered them to say, I don't know what the answer is, but here's the problems that we're facing. Let's figure this out together. What a way to build team unity and to show how much you value your employees. I love that.
Yeah.
And,
Well, let
and
me
it,
ask you. Oh,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to ask. So, when you meet somebody new that is trying to establish themselves in the investment game, where and how do you start talking about that mindset structure for them? What are some of the first steps?
Well, most of the people that we meet with are pretty well established. And what they're really trying to do is go from good to great. They've got a good plan, trying to get a great plan. We meet with some people that maybe have done a great job accumulating, but they don't have a comprehensive strategy. It's very fragmented. It's there's a world of difference between somebody who is merely collecting investments and somebody who is strategically investing towards a desired outcome. So that's what we try to do is come up with a strategic outcome. Not that that outcome can't change, but we want to make sure that people's mindsets view their investments as tools to build freedom and dignity and independence in their life. The investments are a means to an end. And so one of the first things we do is well, first of all, we recognize lifestyle goals. And one of the questions I asked Doug is, well, what do you want your life to look like if you never needed to collect a paycheck ever again? What would be different? If you were to wake up tomorrow morning, you didn't need to go to work, you didn't need to work in your business, what would you want your life to look like? And then we attach some monetary goals to that. But it all comes from lifestyle. Like what would make your life wonderful and fulfilling and rewarding without needing your job? But then attaching some very clear, measurable financial goals and reverse engineering that into where they are today. Because again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about finances, building a business, relationships, it's really hard for us to get our heads wrapped around this idea of the future version of ourselves, Doug in 10 years and 15 years, and getting you today to make a sacrifice for that future you that you've never met. So with a financial blueprint, so to speak, we're able to connect our actions today, our sacrifices today, with the payoff in the future and how that is going to help change somebody's not just financial trajectory, but life trajectory. It kind of brings the future into the moment. The other thing that we do, this kind of touches into what we were just talking about, is letting people know what they're signing up for. Not showing them everything through rose-colored glasses. We actually have a chart of all the major market declines and recessions over the last 50 years, and we walk through that with people. And a lot of times people are like, no, I know, I remember this. 1973, 1974, oil embargo, Nixon resigned. Okay, you remember, but we're still going to talk about it because we want people to have the mindset that this is not going to be easy. If building wealth and financial independence was easy, everybody would do it, but it's not. But giving people an idea and a picture of the challenges and trials they're going to face. Not that those events, COVID, 9/11, Kennedy assassination, all those things, those things may not happen. They're not going to happen exactly, but we're going to face trials and tribulations, and we can't go into this expecting things to just go smoothly and great. Like your plan will face resistance. And I mean, just think of I'll use another fitness metaphor. Let's say somebody's trying to get you to join their gym and they're talking about all the wonderful things that are going to happen. You're going to feel more energy. You're going to lose weight. You're going to look better. Your cholesterol is going to go down. It's just going to be awesome. You'll feel more vibrant and you'll feel stronger. And then, you're like 6 sets of lunges into your first workout and you're like, I don't feel more vibrant. I'm tired. My legs are burning. My lungs are on fire. My heart's rate, none of this is what they told me was going to happen. In fact, I think I'm allergic to this. My skin is flushed. I'm sweating. I'm irritable. I must be allergic to the gym. And if that's the picture that we give people, we only show them the result. We don't talk to the pathway and the sacrifices and the frustration they're going to have to face. We set people up for failure. So, and I think it's important that we focus on what is the result, because that's the goal. And that can help motivate and all that. But we also have to focus on the mundane things that are going to be difficult and hard that we're going to have to execute on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to get to that end goal. Because that's where a lot of people get lost. It's doing the hard things that they haven't been able to connect to that future outcome.
Yeah. Well, that's really powerful, and that is so very true. We maybe culturally or in the society, we think about those outcomes, those lofty, beautiful pictures of healthy, attractive people or holdings or property or outcome, but we don't think about the hard work it takes to get there. and we tend to minimize that, and it's the rare few that do understand it, do embrace it, and realize, yeah, I want that goal, but I'm willing to do the work to get there. And I see it a lot. I do a lot of work in the entrepreneur by acquisition space, and I get people that are coming out of corporate and they go, "Oh, I've run a team before. It'll be easy to do." Well, surprise, surprise, when you go buy a business,
Hmm.
you immediately take on a whole lot of other challenges that fundamentally are going to be quite different from what you might have had in that corporate setting where you've got the power of the paycheck to drive everything, and you're faced with the firsthand front row seat reality of everything about that business is now on you. And in the corporate setting, you had a buffer, you had a cushion. There was a bigger enterprise surrounding you. If your effort lagged or failed temporarily, it was, you know, no big deal in the real scheme of things. It might have felt bad, you might have been punished for it, but it's still, again, in the big scheme of things, the destiny of the company was no big deal. But when you're owning that smaller privately held business, not so much. So it is a mindset shift. And I would argue that every day is a mind game, and you've got to suit up and show up with the right set of ideas in your head, the right values and the right principles, and you got to lock in on a vision of where you want to go with it.
I agree. I think it's a decision you make every day. One of the things that we try to remind each other around here is you have to choose excellence. Excellence is not something that you arrive at. It's a choice you make every day. It's a price you have to pay every day. But just along what you're talking about, I think when people have long-term difficult goals, it's we have to have a vision, like you just said. We have to have a clear picture of what we're trying to accomplish. But I think sometimes in the financial world, in the business world, the tendency is to celebrate only outcomes. And I think we need to reward inputs as well. So we focus a lot on what we can't control in my industry. We focus on the economic weather. What's the weather report for the economy this week? We focus on interest rates. We focus on elections. We focus on tax rates. We focus on a lot of things that individuals can't control. And all those things are important. But so many people, again, just in the world of finance, everybody talks about return rate. One of the biggest deciding factors of somebody's eventual wealth and financial independence is their savings rate. Doesn't matter what your return rate is if you're not feeding that thing enough. But our savings rate is something that's under our control. You can't control the performance of your 401k this month. You can control if you're going to contribute, if you're going to max it out. You put, every paycheck, you put that in. But we often don't celebrate those as wins. And again, I don't care what the thing is. It might be, if you're running a business, you're making sales calls, you want a certain amount of sales every month. Well, the win shouldn't just be the signed contracts at the end of the month. It's the calls that you make every single morning, the no's along with the yeses, that the people that hung up on you, the people that said, please never call me again. I hope your cat dies. Okay. That's a win because you had the courage to call that person. And again, there's a lot of examples of this, but I think it's important to have a healthy mindset, to choose difficult things every single day because it is a daily choice. We've got to focus on inputs, not just outcomes, because inputs are what we can control. The outcome is what we're hoping for, but the input is what we have influence over.
I love it. Well, Chad, I think that's a good word to probably wrap this thing up. I think we're about up on time for today. Thank you so much for sitting in. Tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more about your work.
The website is veritasalaska.com. And don't let the name fool you. We work with folks all over the United States. But we were founded here in Alaska, and we'll keep that in the URL because it's cool. And veritas.alaska on Instagram. You can just look me up on LinkedIn too. Just search for Chad Hufford, and I'll pop up real quick.
Very good. Well, as always, folks, we're going to have those links in the show notes. Just click down when you get a chance and check out Chad's work and the other things he does. By the way, there's some beautiful pictures on his website of the Alaskan countryside there, so you'll enjoy that if you're not familiar with that part of the world. But one last time, Chad, thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Doug. It's been an honor to be here.
Well, all right. And with that, folks, we are going to wrap this thing up. I do want to remind you, if you're listening on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave us a note or drop me a line on my own website at dougthorpe.com. Would be happy to talk with you about any needs you may have for your own leadership development journey. But that said, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.